So I wanted to start by asking you guys a pretty easy question given today's topic, which is how many of you in here have a dream of changing the world? Or changing the society, or changing Pakistan, or changing your village, or maybe even changing your annoying little brother who's back at home? Acha. So most of the people in here. Now here's a little more difficult question. How many of you have a specific plan or a strategy on how to achieve that change or to realize that dream? Okay, just a few people. These are probably the people that are planning on changing their brother's lives and going home and beating him up after the session. So what it sounds like, what it seems like to me is that there are two sides. On one hand, you're saying that you have these dreams, you have these passions, you have these aspirations to change the world. But then on the other side, there's reality. And in between that, there's this big gap. And I will call it a very big ocean, in fact. And this ocean stands in between essentially what is currently and what could be. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've spent a lot of time in this ocean. I can't say I'm a great swimmer, but I've been basically lost at sea for a number of years. And so I want to share a few stories with you all, which might help us figure out how we could move from one side of the shore across the ocean into the other side. So the first story is about a boy. You guys might be able to guess who this boy is, actually. He grew up in India. Actually, he was born in India, but he grew up in Karachi. He shifted at a young age. And like many of you, he had this passion to change the world, to make a difference. But perhaps, unlike many of us, he didn't have very many resources. He came from a very humble family. His mother was bedridden at a pretty young age. His father didn't make a lot of money. They grew up in a village before shifting to Karachi. And essentially, he dropped out of school at the age of 11. So he wasn't very educated, wasn't very literate, and definitely didn't speak English. But still he had this passion or this aspiration to change society, to change humanity. And so he did simply what he could do. One day he was walking to the football field with a bunch of his friends, for example, and he saw at the main bazaar this guy sitting, actually laying down on this platform on the ground. And he could tell that this person was in danger or was struggling, so he went to go see what was going on, and his friends just left, was telling him just forget about it. And he went and talked to this guy, and he found out that he probably had a fever and that he was badly injured. He had some kind of cut on his arm or on his leg. And so he runs home, he gets medicine, he gets a blanket, he gets food, he goes back and gives it to the guy. The next day he comes and he sees that the guy is better. Not 100%, but much better. And so he takes the guy to the mosque. And for the next 3 weeks, 21 days, he comes and visits the guy in the mosque. He brings him some bread, some roti, and he has conversations with him. And he says that this guy was the most influential and the first real teacher that he ever had at the age of 11. He taught him how to see God in humanity. And after 21 days, this guy left. He just disappeared completely, and he never saw him again. But the boy wasn't disheartened. He said, well, I've learned a lot. I've learned how to make a small difference in someone's life. And so he then went around his area, and he looked for everyone who looked like they were struggling. And he tried to understand what it is that they were struggling with. He tried to understand who they are, what kind of interests, passions, aspirations they have, etc. And then he went back home and got medicine for them, or got blankets for them, or got food for them, etc. And he did this for a number of years, and then he started street hawking. Essentially what he did was he was selling pencils, then he was selling pots and pans, then he was selling textiles and different types of clothing. He was delivering newspapers, he was selling and delivering milk. And after about 4 or 5 years, finally there was a dispensary that opened up in his area. And basically what he did was he started volunteering or working at the dispensary. But after a couple of months, it didn't go very well, and he actually got fired as a volunteer. I didn't know it was possible to get fired as a volunteer, but he got fired as a volunteer. But again, not disheartened, he went back to street hawking, he worked hard, he saved up money so he could help more people. And eventually he saved up enough to buy or rent an 8x8 space. And out of this space, he built a dispensary. He started dispensing medicine to people that needed it. And a number of years passed, and eventually saved up enough money to buy this really broken down blue van. And the van needed a lot of work, which he did, and eventually he started responding to emergency calls, basically helping out people however he could. Fast forward 60 years, and that one van turned into 2,000 ambulances. The one dispensary turned into 330 foundation centers throughout the country. And that one person sitting in the bazaar turned into over 50 million Pakistanis who have been affected by this organization. And this person is, of course, Abdul Sattar Edhi. And so Edhi Saab, as we all affectionately know him, is arguably one of the greatest humanitarians in Pakistan, one of the greatest role models, one of the greatest heroes that we have. But how many of us, besides the Amal Fellows, knew about this origin, these years spent hawking and working at the dispensary and being rejected as a volunteer? Just a handful of people. I think if we were to ask Edhi Saab about this question that we're discussing today, how do we move from one side of the shore to the other side across the ocean? How do we realize our dreams? How do we affect change? He would talk about this idea of street hawking and this idea of small beginnings. In fact, in his autobiography, that's exactly what he talks about. He says, follow the method of small beginnings, those amazing lessons from street hawking. Then, step by step, climb towards the top and sweep across the earth. In yourself is evidence. On the way is knowledge. In the streets are issues and solutions. Walk in the streets, live in them, and aim to rise with them. I think that this is very powerful, this idea of small beginnings. And it's something that I've, frankly speaking, and I've come to the profound conclusion that small beginnings are difficult because they are small. Okay, maybe it's not that profound, but the point is that we don't see small beginnings because they're small. We only see things that are big. We only see things that make the highlight reels, that are on the YouTube clips, that are on the Facebook statuses, or if you're old like me, on the newspaper clips and on the magazine covers. And we really don't see the small beginnings, and we start to think that change could only happen and we could only make it to the other side of the shore if we're in one of these big cruise line industrial kind of ships. And the reality is we're in something a lot smaller, a life rescue kind of boat. And so we become paralyzed in a sense, lost at sea, sort of stuck and drowning, sinking slowly and slowly. And this comes back to the story I mentioned that I've spent a lot of time in this ocean, in the sea, a little bit lost myself. And I think during those years that I was in the sea, I had this assumption that there was a treasure map, some secret kind of treasure map. And that if I could only find this treasure map, that I would be able to save the world. I would figure out the secret to saving the world. And so I spent years looking for this treasure map. I went to Harlem. I lived there for 2 years looking for the treasure map. I moved to Kenya for a year looking for the map. I went to South Africa. I went to India. I even went to therapy looking for this map. And I never found it. But something really interesting happened. One day, I got washed ashore. I would say I found shore, but I really just got washed ashore. And I realized that I had made it to the other side, somehow. And I want to share that story with you because it was so unpredictable and it happened when I least expected it. But before I share that story, I should tell you, I come from a family in Northern California, but when most Pakistanis hear that I have 5 brothers and 4 sisters, they assume I'm from northern Pakistan because our family's so big. So the story I want to tell you is actually about one of my brothers. His name is Elijah. And basically, Elijah came to me this weekend. It was the spring of 2013. And he told me, Benji, I want a job. And I was thrilled that he wanted a job. So I sat down with him. We worked on his resume. We spent hours looking at different companies and building a short list of about 20 companies that he would go to. We worked on his cover letter. We got him all dressed up. We worked on his elevator pitch, and we sent him out the door and said, go to these companies, take your resume, your cover letter, your elevator pitch, etc., and see if you can get an interview, see if you can get a job. And I'll never forget, about 3 weeks later, I'll never forget the look on his face or the expression as he basically floated out of the Best Buy retail store after his final round interview and his first job offer. And this moment was the moment where I think I touched land for the first time, the aha moment that I had, because I saw how happy he was. I saw how he essentially felt now like he had some kind of role in society, or maybe he had more purpose in his life. And so I started to think that maybe, I don't know how to change the world, but perhaps I know how to change a very small part of someone's world, and that change can actually lead to really magnificent change in the long run. And so at the time, my business partner and I, Kunal, we decided that our small beginning would be to try and create more stories like Elijah's. We would work with people, especially youth, and develop these kind of business skills, communication and presentation and teamwork and leadership, etc. And we were really excited. We thought we had finally figured it out. We were on the other side of the shore. But then we started asking a lot of questions. And we started asking things like, should we go to Kenya? Should we go to India? Should we go to Pakistan? We started asking questions like, how can we make the most difference? How can we make not just one Elijah, but 10 Elijahs and 100 Elijahs and thousands of Elijahs and hundreds and thousands and millions even of Elijahs? And we started drifting slowly back into that ocean. And I sent at this time an SOS kind of email to my mentor, Jacqueline Novogratz, who is the CEO and founder of a nonprofit called Acumen, and also happens to be married to the curator of TED. And I'm shocked that she even responded. I'm shocked she even read the email. And I'm shocked and extremely forever grateful that she responded. And her response was very simple, and it was very beautiful. She said, focus less on where you start, and focus less on how you start, and instead focus on just starting and letting the work teach you. And so Kunal and I decided, okay, let's just start, and let's just start in Pakistan. The dear Pakistani poet Allama Iqbal once said that the world is not something to be merely seen or known through concepts, but something to be made and remade by continuous action or continuous amal. And so at our organization, Amal Academy, we decided let's just start by helping other people just start, by helping other people follow the method of small beginnings, helping them to take the first step or perhaps take the next step towards realizing their dreams and making it across that ocean. And so we took the idea to Stanford. They said, it's not perfect. It's got a lot of holes in it. There are many reasons why this boat might sink and sink very quickly, but we can see you're passionate about it, and so we'll take a risk. And they sent us here to Lahore. And so about 12 months ago, we just started by having very small workshops working with just 4 or 5 students at a time, getting feedback and improving our curriculum. And when we were doing corporate trainings, very small corporate trainings with different organizations here in Pakistan. And we learned a lot. We made a lot of mistakes. We made a lot of failures. We made a lot of wrong turns. And there's still a lot of holes left in the boat. But we learned a lot through that process, and we incorporated those learnings into the Amal Career Prep Fellowship. which is a program we launched about 8 months ago. And essentially, it's a 3-month intensive program where we're teaching these same skills: communication, presentation, leadership, teamwork, problem solving, etc. And the program, again, is very far from perfect. And I often am very critical about how much we are moving the needle in terms of our fellows and our students. But probably the number one lesson that the fellows have taught me is that you don't need to be perfect. And perhaps perfect is actually the enemy of progress. That very small investments can, in fact, lead to very significant change. In many ways, one of the Amal fellows said it best at graduation this past week. He said that Amal Academy took stones and turned them into diamonds. And my response to him was that actually you Amal fellows took the stones that we were throwing at you and converted them into diamonds. Out of the first batch and the second batch, within just a couple of weeks after graduating, 70% of those fellows were able to get jobs, and about 30 of them are here today, so we can give them a round of applause. And yet, still there are days where I start drifting back into the ocean. Days where I think less about the fellows and more about the thousands of applications we've received that we haven't been able to accept into the program, or the tens of thousands of people that have never even heard about the program, or the hundreds of thousands of people like Edhi Saab who dropped out of the education system, or the millions of people who are never even involved in the education system. And so the advice that I give to you is the same advice, frankly speaking, that I give to myself on a daily basis, which is just don't get flooded and don't be sunk by the things that you cannot do, but instead focus on and move towards the change that you can make. Embrace and follow the methods of small beginnings, like Edhi Saab said, and just start, like Jacqueline said. Just start by giving your friend a mock interview, or just start by volunteering with organizations like Reading Room Project and RUPT and Edhi Foundation. Just start by hosting a TEDx event in Akachiyabadi or in your village. And just start by going out into the street and talking with people and getting to know their problems and getting to know their aspirations and getting to know their hopes and learning from them. And just start by going home after this TED Talk and working with your annoying brother on helping him on his CV. The world is something to be made and remade by continuous action. So get out there and take action. Recreate. Create the world. And if you fail, and definitely you will fail, then recreate the world. Learn from those, and then get up and recreate the world. Take this idea of perfection and just throw it out of the boat. And focus instead on what you can do. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be smooth sailing. But I promise you that with time, and perhaps without even realizing it, you will make it to the other side. Thank you so much.